Today, we're talking about bringing America together on climate, an ever more prescient theme after yesterday's clash in the Capitol. Please join me in welcoming our guests, Arthur Evans, Jr., PhD, and CEO of American Psychological Association. Hello, Arthur.
Hello.
Ruth Ivory-Moore, Program Director, Environment and Corporate Social Responsibility for the Evangelical Lutheran Church in America. Hello, Ruth.
Hi everyone.
And Meis, Wright, Executive Director, Local Government Commission. Thank you and welcome, Kate.
Happy to be with you all.
Wonderful. Before we dive into our conversation, I do want to take a moment to recognize the gravity of the rioting insurrection in the Capitol yesterday. We might all be feeling a bit shaken today. It really was a dark day for our democracy, fueled by misinformation, deliberate provocation. This was not the America we know and love. But let's remember this moment as a clear directive to work even harder to ensure our democratic processes and structures are upheld, are strengthened. Let's consider what each of us can do to connect with our neighbors and bridge our divides. Our country, it's worth fighting for, but let's stop fighting each other. Rather, let's find common ground, common cause, and importantly, common humanity. For those who pray, please do. We've got a road ahead of us filled with opportunity for renewal and for progress. We're going to hear from our guests in a moment who've also made statements in response to yesterday's events. But first, today we're launching a new segment on Let's Talk Climate, which is Climate Change Quick Takes. 2 minutes of mostly good news on climate. So first, the not so good news. Fueled by climate change, extreme weather set records in 2020, causing close to $50 billion in damages and the loss of at least 188 lives by early October. As the chart shows, no region of the US was spared and many cities were hit multiple times. And as if COVID wasn't enough, the US experienced 16 individual billion-dollar weather events in 2020, tying for the highest record with 2011 and 2017, a near quintupling of events over the last 4 decades. And by the way, these estimates only account for direct losses, which exclude the cost to mental and physical health, the toll of inequity, and the impacts to our way of life, particularly for the most vulnerable among us. So many lives and livelihoods have been impacted. Okay, now for the good news I promised. First up is renewable energy. Good news is renewable energy sources are now the cheapest source of energy, with costs to generate solar and wind in particular plummeting as capacity has increased. The costs are not only the cheapest to generate now, but also in recorded history. This paves the way to path for further scale, and let's hope us consumers see the savings. And speaking of renewable energy, on Monday, before all of yesterday's mayhem, Congress passed the federal stimulus package, including extensions for wind and solar tax credits. This package also adds an offshore wind tax credit, energy efficiency incentives, and extends credits for energy efficient homes and weatherization, which now include renewable energy installation. Also included are investments in energy storage, carbon capture and removal, and research and development on advanced nuclear. This package marks the first time in 13 years that Congress has passed a comprehensive energy policy. Let's count it as progress. Last but not least, remember the movie Mad Max? Well, it was set in 2021, and here we are in 2021. They certainly got the mask idea right, but thankfully things are not as dire as the movie predicted, at least from the climate change perspective. In fact, the best news I've heard so far this week is this. Leading scientists, including Michael Mann, have now confirmed recent research shows that stopping greenhouse gas emissions will break the vicious cycle of warming faster than previously expected. They said that is now scientific consensus that warming stabilized quickly within 10 years of emissions going to zero. So what we thought was baked into the system doesn't have to be so. The sooner we get our carbon emissions down to zero, the faster we can stabilize our climate, and it is still possible to maintain a habitable planet. That is the vision of the future we can all get behind. And with that good news, we will wrap up our 2-minute climate quick take. Okay, now on to our conversation. Ruth, Kate, Arthur, thank you for joining us today. Let's jump in. I want us to talk about bringing America together on climate change. American polarization has reached a fever pitch. spanning a variety of social issues and likewise manifesting in our political divide we saw on full display yesterday. Divisions run deep, but the reality is there's a lot of common ground. We just have to remember to look for it, to seek it. We can bridge our divides when we focus on doing so. We can bring America together on climate change even. So let's talk about how. Arthur, let's start with you. The American Psychological Association has published research on the mental health impacts of climate change, which we were pleased to collaborate with you on. Can you tell our listeners, is anyone spared of the impact? Do we share a common plight? I know your offices are less than a mile from the Capitol building, and you've shared some statements in council online support. What does bringing Americans together on climate look like from your perspective, particularly given the events of yesterday?
Yeah, thank you. I think that all of these issues are very much connected. And one of the themes running through yesterday was misinformation and not understanding. And I think that there is certainly a parallel in the climate work that we're doing. Clearly, there are people who believe that climate change isn't happening, and there are those who might believe that it's happening, but we can't do anything about it. Despite what the evidence is, and so I think one of the ways that we bring people together around this is that I think we have to be very thoughtful in how we talk about these issues, how we frame these issues. One of the things that the APA is very much interested in, and many of our experts who work in this area are interested in, is how do we frame the issues in such a way that people understand them and that people are more likely to listen and to be able to connect to those issues. One of the challenges is in this area is whether or not people believe these events are impacting them. And if you take, for example, what's happening in many parts of the country, or in fact around the world, in terms of how climate change is affecting agriculture, for example. And that is having a direct impact on people's lives. It's having a direct impact on people's ability to run their businesses effectively, their farm businesses. They may not connect those changes with climate. And so part of what we have to do is to make sure that we are connecting the dots for people so that this isn't viewed as an issue that's over there, but as an issue that is affecting me and directly connected to my life. So that's one thing, but there are other things that we can do to help people understand and be more likely to act. For example, one of the things that I think many people in the climate world have understood is that, talking about these issues in terms of fatalistic catastrophizing and all of those things may be true, but what it also does is that it immobilizes people because they feel like, there's nothing that I can do. And so reframing is another psychological principle that we think can be helpful in doing this. So I think obviously the challenge is that we have these divides. The good news is that there are some things that we know from psychological science and research that can help us reframe so that people are more likely to see these things as being relevant to them and that these are things that they can actually do something about. And I think it's really incumbent upon all of us to do that.
Absolutely. People are not hearing enough the solutions and benefits, and that's for sure, and how they're so accessible to them. Thank you, Arthur. Ruth, the Evangelical Lutheran Church in America has served on the front lines of many social issues. So no doubt 2020 was a busy year for the ELCA and many communities of faith. What did you learn in 2020? What does that mean for action on climate in 2021 by the ELCA or really any person of faith?
Well, I think we learned the same thing that probably the general public learned. Just as Arthur mentioned, communication means something. Words mean something. We also learned, particularly from COVID-19, the frailties and the interconnectivities of social, economic, and environmental health systems. We know these systems are connected. When you look at COVID-19 was sort of like a sudden onset event compared to climate change, which will be a much more of a long-term onset event. But we see the impact upon the social and economic perspective systems to be significant. But in the end, we still do have hope, because we do see, based on what we saw yesterday, as horrific as it was, at the end of the day, the Congress was able to do its job. Democracy still stands up. So God still prevails. But our faith traditions point to our universal and moral responsibilities to care for creation. There are some in and out of the movement who see addressing climate change as a radical issue, but nothing could be more from the truth. We have to understand that we have to support various on-ramps for people to get involved with climate action, and that the avenues should include advocacy, education, and also theology from the faith-based perspective. We recognize that a top-down approach plus the grassroots approach must be synchronized. That is, we cannot go into a community and tell them what they need to do. We need to be listening and making sure that everyone is at the table. We feel we can use the faith community as a springboard to take action to the next level. That is, in the forms of advocacy with our local, state, and federal government, and even international. The advantage of the faith-based organizations like EOCA is that we're nonpartisan. So often we can get into doors that may not be open to others. But most importantly, I want to get back to the first point of communication. What was so stark yesterday is that otherwise rational people, once they've been infused with lies, will act irrationally. And what we saw yesterday was significant irrationality in actions. They were fed communication, they were fed information, and it continues to be fed information that they believe. But what we find in the climate arena is that we have got to make sure that we use language that resonates with people. We've got to make sure that we understand where the audience is. We have to make sure that we meet them where they are. And we need to find areas of commonality. For example, one of our key priorities going forward will be addressing infrastructure issues. That will address so many issues, whether you live in rural America, you live in urban America, or you live in suburbia. Addressing issues that cut across all political, social, economic issues are what we're finding that we believe that we need to start to address. And we start bringing people on board by meeting them where they are with language that resonates with them. We feel that we can help make some inroads into climate action.
Fantastic, Ruth. Thank you. And Kate, some people have said in our country, building on what Ruth is talking about, that we're in a state of a syndemic, which is multiple concurrent pandemics, including but not limited to COVID-19, systemic racism, climate change. All of this takes root at the local level, in our hometowns, in our communities. So what do you think are the prospects for bringing America together on climate change at the local and city level?
Sure. Well, 2020 certainly highlighted how broken our current systems are, as you've said, with the syndemic across multiple different areas. But I think many of us are now together in agreement that we can't go back to status quo, because status quo wasn't working for a lot of people. And that has been highlighted in a really dramatic and painful way in the last year and, yesterday, in the last week. We can't continue to boost our economy in a way that would continue to lead us into equity and health crises. And that's what we have been seeing, and that's been exacerbated by the pandemic. At the city level, cities are struggling in a massive way to adapt to both the health impacts and the social constraints, but also the deep economic impacts that we're facing. And so that's going to leave longstanding fiscal impacts as a result of that, which means that we need to be much more strategic and creative about the investments that we make. And so the way we need to bring Americans together on climate is to focus on those high priority climate projects, that also deliver and achieve economic and social equity benefits, because we just don't have enough money to tackle these as separate items, and they are interconnected and they shouldn't be tackled separately. So when we think about available funding we have now, whether that's in the regular capital improvement plans that cities do, or whether that's stimulus dollars that we anticipate will come throughout the year, we need to be looking at projects like infill housing, critical transit lines, bicycle and pedestrian infrastructure. We've seen how important broadband deployment is, and thinking about measures to sustain some of the telecommuting programs that we've seen. Looking at zero emission vehicles and urban greening, especially in marginalized communities. Those types of investments can give us the climate benefits, they can reduce air pollution, they can help create jobs, and also address some of our social and racial equity gaps. So I think, there's this opportunity now that we would have loved to not have the opportunity to suffer and learn in this pandemic, but we have suffered together, and there has been a brokenness that has been exposed through this time. And I hope that we will use that common experience to build back in a way that is more equitable and resilient and does allow for more prosperity in the future.
Yeah, and if when you were talking about all the things we can do, that multi-solve for climate and other issues, it sounded wonderful. I mean, I would love all that in my community. If people knew, if they had that vision of what it could be and the benefits, how powerful could that be, right? So we really do have an opportunity. I want to bring in a question now from our audience, our listeners. Carol Di Benedetto from San Francisco, California, where I am right now. She asks, how can we deeply reach and connect with people when they are so siloed in their media choices, some of which spread misinformation? Ruth, you talked about that. We saw that really activating people yesterday. Any thoughts? Why don't we start with you, Ruth?
The best way still is to tell the truth, but also to try to understand the sources that they're coming from. And we have to start to understand our audience better. We have to meet them where they are, and meet them not only with language that resonates with them, but also on the media. We need to make sure that we're involved with the media that they are out there with. Now, that's not to say that if we say what you just heard is not the truth. We need to be able to present facts to them in a manner that resonates with them. We need to present it in a manner that maybe is not seen as specifically refuting, but showing what that alternative is, and presenting it in a way that is illogical to see it any other way. But it is a mounting and daunting task.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. Dr. Evans, you also touched on this in your comments. You want to weigh in?
Sure. I really like what Ruth said, and what I would add to that is that it really is about how we frame issues. One of the things I'm doing at the American Psychological Association with my management team and our staff is really trying to be careful about how we talk about issues, because unfortunately certain issues and topics get aligned with certain parts of the political spectrum. And I think that these are issues that should be relevant across the political spectrum. Mm-hmm. And so, because the audiences that are, on that part of the political spectrum have a certain kind of language, you can talk about climate in such a way that, in this case, climate, but it could be any topic, in such a way that, people who are already there understand it, and there'll be a lot of head nodding, but that doesn't necessarily resonate with people who are in a different part of the political spectrum. And so the question is, how do you take these issues and you talk about them in a way that they really resonate? You use the language of that part of the political spectrum. How do you talk about these issues in ways that people in that part of the political spectrum understand them and will resonate? So, for example, one of the issues that comes up a lot when we talk about being activists around climate change is, putting our money, if we're investing in the stock market, investing in companies that are really focusing on environmental impact. Well, when that movement started, the argument against it was that you could lose money, that wasn't an effective way to invest. Well, it turns out now that those companies are actually doing better from a financial standpoint. Well, that gets my attention. And so I think that we have to think about these issues through the lens of the whole population, and to be able to talk about them from a perspective that will resonate across the whole political spectrum.
Absolutely. And it's also about media aside, being in front of them with these choices. And as Ruth mentioned earlier, connecting with also people personally, right? How do we show them what's possible? Kate, you nodded to this in your thoughts about what's possible in multi-solving. What role do mayors have to play in this space?
Well, I think that, if we look at the siloing of media and how fractured we are and where we're going for our sources, I think the bottom line is we're all going to places that we trust for our information. And so I think it starts with building that trust. And to build that trust, we need to be active listeners. We need to be able to show empathy. We need to be able to listen to the real pain and lived experience of people that, may have different beliefs than us, to show vulnerability. And then once we get to that place, and whether that's a mayor or a local leader of any sort, faith, health, otherwise, all of these folks are in positions of credibility and power and, seen as trusted leaders. Once we get to that trust, then we can provide that framing that fits with what's going to really move that audience and the irrefutable information. But I really think it starts with building that trust and being able to speak to people's pain and really have empathy.
Yeah, I mean, some examples, folks have been hurt economically, right? So when you were talking about how bringing renewables in or doing some of the infrastructure projects within a city, can not only bring jobs back to the community, but also, of course, if we do it right, help address climate change. And certainly, so there's that, hey, we can bring jobs and strengthen our city argument, right? For some people. For others, it's, hey, you have not been part of this discussion. Someone from a rural community or a disadvantaged economic community. Ruth, you talked about bringing them to the table, right? So if we really start to bring them in, to really truly plan with folks, that can help get us some progress. And certainly, Dr. Evans, you talked about media choices. I mean, certainly there's work we can do to try to get to fair and balanced media again. That's going to take some time, but there's a lot we can do to show the truth to folks as well through media.
Yeah, absolutely.
Wonderful. Okay, so now we're going to move on to our next topic. We now know we have a fighting chance to act on climate. Federal administration, the new Congress indicate promise for action. Solutions have never been more accessible. And even as I noted before, they're also financially attractive. But as we know from history, we must keep the pressure on to ensure our policymakers act with speed and scale. So all three of you have signed on to MomentUs, which is a new campaign supported by ecoAmerica to call for policymakers at all levels to have climate emissions each decade going forward, restore thriving nature, and correct racial, cultural, and economically based injustices. So MomentUs embraces that now is our moment to act on climate. The US must lead, and that a broader diversity of Americans really needs to be welcomed into and activated on climate solutions. Ruth, you and Kate both helped us to conceptualize the MomentUs campaign. Thank you. What led you to sign on, and how will you incorporate it in your work? How do we get more people with faith and congregations to see the opportunity and benefit that climate solutions bring?
Yeah. When I guess it started about a year ago, I was at one of the United Nations Framework Conventions on Climate Change. I'll say UNFCCC from here on, conferences. And the secretary of the UNFCCC made a statement that there are 4 numbers that really matter. At that time, it was 1.5. We need to limit global warming to 1.5. Then there's also 2020, which was last year's, when countries were supposed to update their prediction or commitment to reduce greenhouse gases. Then it's 2030. We need to reduce our emission of greenhouse gases by 45% and reach carbon zero by the 4th number, or decarbonization by 2050. We really are running out of time, but we can still do it. As noticed, as written in the IPCC report, it will call for unprecedented changes across all sectors, not just energy, but all sectors. And when the MomentUs project came up, we were all over it because it actually embodies what we need to do. We need to get on a high level of momentum to make sure we make this happen, because there is no plan B. We don't have a choice. We have to make sure that from the faith-based communities, from everybody, from business sector, that we're all involved, that we're all working together, because the planet is our home, Earth is our home. And if we don't, we're not going to leave for future generations the type of Earth that we know and that we love. So it is a matter of intense urgency.
Well, and now, certainly the cost of solutions are on our side. So it makes financial sense on top of it, right?
Yes.
Thank you, Ruth. Kate, you signed on to MomentUs, both as an individual and for your organization. What is the role of local governments in addressing the MomentUs proclamation? So what, could our listeners encourage their community leaders to sign on?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, the urgency could not be more real and more pronounced. And the role of cities is going to be really critical, because half of the world's population lives in cities, and that's likely to increase to 2/3 by 2030. The challenge is cities use a large portion of the world's energy supply and are responsible for about 70% of global energy-related greenhouse gas emissions. So in many ways, cities are the main cause of climate change. They're also the areas where we're likely to be most impacted and where we feel the risk. And we see it day to day in our communities, whether that's from extreme heat or sea level rise or major storm events or droughts. We're experiencing that in our own communities. All that said, cities are also key to the solutions as well. So much of the greenhouse gas emissions we see are from the transportation and the energy sector, and that is related to decisions that local governments make. Energy, building, mobility, planning solutions, these are all areas for massive innovation to deliver emission cuts. We can see a huge change in the way we build if we have compact, walkable cities with good public transit. We can greatly reduce our per capita footprint. If we generate more of our energy from clean, resource efficient energy and move away from fossil fuels, as you said, the price of solar panels and renewable energy has just plummeted. It's a time like no other where it isn't going to be necessarily more expensive to invest in some of these solutions that are better for our environment, for our public health, and renewable energy is actually creating more jobs now than coal and other industries. So it is an area for just transition and for economic development as well. As we look at cities and the impact on transportation, we should be planning around people instead of cars. We should be investing in bikeable, walkable communities and zero carbon public transport, which again can provide jobs, can improve people's health, and also provide us the greenhouse gas emission reductions that we need. So I think signing on to the MomentUs guide and encouraging your community leaders to sign on is a great way to commit to action, to double down on and acknowledge the urgency of the challenge, and to really create some momentum to get the community moving and your local leaders moving on this great challenge that we have ahead of us.
Well, now coupled with the stimulus package, certainly there's incentives to do so as well. Thanks, Kate. And Arthur, the APA has taken quite a few steps to lead on climate over the decade. Talk to us about signing on to MomentUs. What does it mean for the APA and psychologists nationwide?
Yeah, first of all, I want to just thank ecoAmerica for their leadership and the partnership that we've had over the years. I think one of the reasons that we have been so engaged around this issue is that partnership. And, it turns out that I think our association and psychologists in general are interested in this issue from two perspectives. From one, just as a citizen, I think our membership understands the importance of this work, and I think are personally committed to it. So a large proportion of our members are there from that perspective. But then from the perspective of the discipline, there is a real strong desire to apply what we know from psychological science and research and practice to this issue. And so the whole field and the whole association is committed to that. We, as you pointed out, for over a decade, we've been working on these issues. In fact, last year, our Council of Representatives, which is the highest authority in our association, passed a second resolution. We've already had one resolution on this issue, really recommitting the association to working on these issues. And in fact, have established a task force that is going to be looking at the unique contribution that our field can make to this issue, which is an update from as I said, our previous resolution, because the research has actually improved. There's actually more research out there that we can actually draw on. And so we're very interested in doing that. We're also working internationally with our partners around the world. Last year, the United States, American Psychological Association, and the Portuguese Psychological Society led and co-sponsored a international summit, a global summit on climate. And we brought together psychological associations from around the world. Every continent was represented. And what was very powerful about that is that psychologists around the world understand this issue. Now, the reality is that some of them are doing a lot of work like we are in the US. Others are just beginning to understand that. But what was consistent literally across the world is that people understand the impact that these issues are having and understand the role that they and we as a field need to play in that. And so we heard from people, for example, from the Caribbean who are dealing with hurricanes. In fact, my wife's family is from the Caribbean. And I can tell you in the last, I would say 10 years, there are probably more hurricanes that have hit that part of the world than in the previous 20 or 30 years. And the impact is both economic and psychological. There's just lots of impact that people are seeing. We're hearing from people, for example, from New Zealand, and having the kind of wildfires and kinds of things that we've seen here in the U.S. So, the international and the global community is also interested in this issue, and I think we can learn in the U.S. from our counterparts across the world, and hopefully they can also learn from us. So that work is very exciting, and we're also working with the UN as well. So we have a really long-term commitment, and so our signing of the agreement is just an affirmation of the importance of this issue for us. It reaffirms our commitment, and we're going to stay engaged on these issues in all kinds of ways going forward.
Wonderful. Your research shows, folks are, not many of us are spared from the psychological impacts. I mean, if you looked at the chart I put up earlier around the $1 billion weather events, I mean, yeah, they're $1 billion. So they're also quite devastating for people. You see a lot of, from what I understand from the research, you see a lot of post-traumatic stress after these events, really long-term implications, families being torn apart. And as those kind of events happen more often, not only in the US, but around the world, like you mentioned, Australia, I mean, that's pretty devastating, right? The other piece of it is the support. And I know you're working on that as well. How do we have a more comprehensive support system for folks so that they can seek mental health services to get the care they need, to really build more resiliency into ourselves and into our communities. So thank you for doing that work as well.
Yeah, can I say something about that? It's such an important point that you're making about, the widespread impact. And, we see that, we know that people who live in areas, whether it's hurricanes or fires or whatever the climate related issues are experiencing a lot of psychological issues. And that includes not only, depression and their reaction to those issues, but also their anxiety that's created by living in those parts of the world. And one of the implications for our mental health, the mental health aspects of this, is that we really have to start thinking about mental health from a more population-based way. Unfortunately, most mental health systems around the world are focused around treating people in terms of having a diagnosis and an illness. That's important. But one of the things that the climate work is really highlighting is the importance of thinking more upstream, thinking about that anxiety, that eco-anxiety that some people refer to, that is causing distress in people's lives, and if not managed, will lead to other problems. So one of the things that we are looking at is how do we start to mobilize more of our members, but also the broader mental health community to start thinking about these issues from a more global population standpoint, because these issues affect entire populations differently, but clearly we need to have different types of interventions as these issues play out in around our communities around the world.
Absolutely. Thank you for that work. I want to bring another question that's related to what we've been talking about. David Rowland from Sacramento, California. He said, people are concerned about investing both emotionally and with their money in a goal that has an outcome they can't control. How to address that? Ruth, you want to take that first? He's talking about just transition here.
Yeah. When you're talking about just transition, unfortunately, there is no one size fits all. You really have to do it on a locale basis. A community that's been devastated because coal industry is dying or no longer there will have a different perspective or different need than from someone who maybe a refinery is shutting down or something like that. Or from someone in an urban area. But when you're looking at investing in areas, there's some things that are common. We need good infrastructure. No matter where we are, we will need good infrastructure. We need infrastructure from a number of different perspectives. We need infrastructure from roadways. We need infrastructure to connect rural America to the rest of America, particularly related to broadband. And also, as we go and move toward 100% renewable energy, we need to be cognizant of the fact that renewable energy is not exactly steady like the energy that we produce today, steady in the output, but that you have your high points and your lower points that may not coincide or sync with the needs of the supplier or in the distribution system. So we need to be able to buffer that with some kind of storage type sort of, whether it's a battery, other means of storing. So when we talk about just transition and investing in communities, we need to understand what's the basis of the community, what do the people need, what are the demographics, what is the infrastructure, what needed, and actually the age of the population, the education level of the population. So it's really not, like I said, not a one size fit all, but the most important thing you do is to understand what is happening in that community now, what do they need to do, and what will they look like a few years from now? Are there markets or entities or businesses that can be brought in? And, is there something that you could do for cybersecurity, or are there other, is it located near railways so that you can bring in an industry that relies heavy on the train system? So it is a matter of doing due diligence, but you can't control by looking at doing your research into that community, into that area that you're investing in. And like I said, for some things like infrastructure, that's going to be key and will be needed in every aspect of a community's life. And I hope that sort of answers the question.
Yeah. I mean, it also touches on another question that Alan Johnson from West Virginia asked about sort of employment and economic help in coal producing mono economies, right? So it sounds like, we have more control than we might think on this issue, and solutions can be just. They can help with the employment. They can help with economics, especially in those communities that are really dependent on fossil fuels. Kate or Dr. Evans, you want to respond? Kate?
Sure, I would just say, I mean, certainly there are many job opportunities, and actually, as I mentioned earlier, wind and solar are growing in jobs and have long surpassed the amount of jobs we have in coal industries, but that doesn't mean that we don't have to be really intentional about those specific communities that have been reliant on industries that may not have as much viability moving into the future. And we've seen that with coal, even without carbon pricing, right? I mean, so, with the change in price of renewables and with other factors, so there's a policy piece of this, but then there's also just the market piece as well. So we're seeing both move in the direction of renewable energy, which just means that we need to be really intentional about investing in vocational programs, job training programs. We can't leave it to chance that all will benefit from this transition.
For sure. And so, individual people can, or reorient their careers to this. They can invest their money if they have money to invest, because those portfolios are doing very well. And with all of that we do, from ecoAmerica likes to say, from the moment we lift our heads off the pillow to the moment we put them back down at night, every choice we make during the day is a choice we can make to help be part of the solution on climate. So we truly have a lot more control than we think we do. And certainly so much is now moving in the right direction. Dr. Evans, you want to add anything to that?
No, I think that, I don't have anything to add to those responses.
Okay, thank you. Okay, so why don't we move into what people can do? The MomentUs call to action asks us to act now, both individually and collectively. So let's focus on the individual. What can individual people do, our listeners do, to act on climate? And this is our lightning round. So if you can answer in a minute or less, that would be great. Kate, why don't we start with you? What can Americans do to get their local policymakers to act on climate change, particularly if they haven't participated in advocacy in the past?
Sure. So get comfortable with going to city council meetings and, show up at public hearings. That's a great way to do it. I think starting with some of these commitments, the MomentUs commitments, the emergency climate resolutions are a good start, but then there's also really specific measures. So looking at, the largest emitters of carbon in communities are transportation and energy. So you can advocate for a prioritization or a modal hierarchy, looking at active transportation first as the healthiest and most efficient, public transit and pooled shared mobility for longer trips, and zero emission vehicles when transportation or active transportation isn't viable. And we've seen that with slow streets. They've taken off in COVID. We have a little more space that we can play with. Cities like Oakland are working on 74 miles of slow streets. So asking your community, your local leaders to pursue something like slow streets could be a really good start. And we've also seen a big shift in the way we look at powering our buildings. So building electrification, mandating that especially new buildings are built all electrification. That will have a huge impact on greenhouse gas emissions, on health, and even on, it'll lower construction costs, lower energy bills. So looking and advocating for those, multi-solving, multi-benefit solutions.
Well, and there's so many more resources now for people to understand what can be done in their community, as well as how to advocate. So I hadn't done much advocacy before ecoAmerica, and it sounded like a scary proposition. But and the reality is, our lawmakers and our policymakers, they need to hear from us, and they're people too, right? They need you to see your faces, to hear your voice. You don't have to have all the solutions. You just have to know what you're looking for, right? What you would like to see in your community. And I think people need to remember that, why you're in front of a lawmaker, why, or elected official, why, what it is you'd like to see in your community. Just really telling your story is very powerful. And the more we can do that as citizens and residents, the better. Arthur, let's do a role-playing scenario here. If I was a psychologist, say in Atlanta, Georgia, what could I do about climate change starting today?
One of the things we're trying to do is to get psychologists to be more active in using their role and their expertise in their communities. And when you asked that question, I thought of three immediate things. If you're doing advocacy, I spent 20 years as a public policy person, so usually I was on the end of receiving that advocacy. So there are three things that I would say. Number one is to start small, and particularly if people are not accustomed to, or working around these issues. And so the more you can make it something simple that people can do, whether it is, I don't know, you come up with it. Maybe it's pursuing LEED certification in a certain percentage of city buildings, for example. We're actually platinum LEED certified at this point. Our association is. So I think making things small and simple, easy wins for policymakers is really important. I think the second thing is to show the benefit. As we've talked today, we've talked about the financial benefit to some of the things that are actually very helpful. And so being able to quantify that and to talk about the benefit to policymakers is always really important, particularly if there are things that they can highlight with their constituents. And then the third thing that I would say is to celebrate wins. And whether that's getting an article about this great work that this policymaker did, or writing a letter to get an award for those folks. Those are the kinds of things that can help, one, motivate people to actually act, but also bring people into the fold who may not be there because they're being reinforced in some very positive ways. So for us, what we want is our psychologists using what they know in their local communities, going out there, engaging folks, both the policymakers, but also the broader community in ways that help to advance these issues.
Fantastic, thank you. Ruth, what suggestions do you have for individual people?
Yeah, for individual, first I suggest become educated, become knowledgeable about the general, I'm not saying become an expert, but understand what your role is in the climate in your community. Then understand what are the big policy, what are the policy issues that you can influence. Then also make sure that you get to know your local city official, your state the state official, and particularly the federal. And I do agree with what the comment made earlier, is that to start small, because you can't tackle everything at once, but determine what is best for you, your community, or your household. If you're looking at your household, what energy efficiency measure can you contribute? Can you do? How can you reduce water usage? Again, something simple like water heater, installation. So energy efficiency measures on personal level and also in businesses. energy efficiency of buildings is significant. So if we can start working on those issues first, but then also tell your story to your elected officials. They will respond to their personal stories from their constituencies. Then after that, I say, understand what your community needs. For example, the ELCA has a very diverse community. We have urban and we also have our rural areas. Example, in Chicago, if I want to reach zero decarbonization, and if I want to use solar panels, I need to understand that all the buildings in Chicago cannot withstand putting solar panels structurally on the building. So it's a matter of understanding where you are. In another city, there's so much concrete there that because of the climate change with the heavy downpours, that those streets get to be flooded because there's no way for the water, and it overrides the sewer system. So I would say understand what your community needs, but I do agree with starting small and then branch out to the neighborhood and to the community, but also make sure that you are in contact with your elected officials so that they can hear your stories and then you will be there. And then I guess lastly, what I would say, make sure that you're at the table. The late John Lewis would say that if the table's already filled, when you get there, bring your chair, bring your fold-up chair and join in at the table. Make sure your voice is heard.
Thank you, Ruth. Absolutely. Make sure your voice is heard, and once you start participating in those kind of conversations, it becomes easier and easier. Show up to your city supervisor's town hall. There's so much you can do. And you, again, don't have to have all the answers. You can simply ask questions. What are you going to do about the flooding? What are you going to do about building electrification? Or what are you going to do about having slow streets? We love them, right? Just let your voice be heard. So thank you for all that. Well, and it's also now time to wrap up. So Ruth, Kate, Arthur, thank you for joining us today. Thank you for your wisdom, your inspiration, all you're doing to act on climate. You've given our listeners a lot to think about and act on. So for all of you listening, take a moment to go to ecoamerica.org/MomentUs and join a rapidly growing list of leaders who are signing on as an individual or an organization to the commitment. And please join us, subscribe to our YouTube channel to watch our special episodes and tune in next week on January 14th for our next live episode, Local Communities Act, Rising to the Climate Challenge in 2021 at 2 p.m. Eastern. Be sure to subscribe and follow us for the latest thought leadership resources and episodes on climate action and advocacy. And from all of us at ecoAmerica, thank you. Stay safe, stay well, sign on to MomentUs, and see you at our next episode on January 14th. Thank you.